Hi, I'm Athina Karatzogianni. I'm the editor of Digital Activism and Society for Emerald. And we thought, because Emerald is holding a podcast series with some of the authors at their publishing house to coincide with the week of the International Day of Democracy for the UN in September. And the events series is called The Future of Democracy. And I've opted, instead of doing yet another academic, how can I put, academic show of my own prowess, that it would be much more important to discuss a current issue, a current crisis taking place in Belarus at the moment, and discuss what is happening in Belarus in relation to the elections and the protests after the elections, the use of digital media during the protests, and in the wider context, and discuss the future of democracy in Belarus, which is the last bastion, I suppose, of dictatorship in Europe. I'm very happy that Aliaksandr Herasimenka, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute, accepted my invitation to discuss Belarus with me today. So, Alexander, thank you for giving us your time. This is a very important topic at the moment. And I would like to start by asking you if you can give us a wider political context here of where this current crisis is coming from, to just situate us in the wider geopolitical, national, socioeconomic context in Belarus.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your interest in the topic of Belarus and the protest in Belarus. I think Belarus is quite an old dictatorship. It had, or it still has, an authoritarian regime, which is 25 years old. Almost since time of the independence, it's been an authoritarian country, though there was a short period of democracy. And there is an election every 5 years of president, and the same man became president every time since independence. And after each election, there is a protest movement emerges. Some authoritarian protest, anti-authoritarian protest emerges. But this time, something different happened. This anti-authoritarian protest developed into something bigger. And it all started, the campaign started in May or April, and it started quite unusually. Instead of sort of usual figures to be competing with Lukashenko, the president, other type of people decided to participate in the election. And one of them was a blogger, one of the most popular video bloggers in Belarus, whose name is Tikhanovsky. Just a few years ago, he started a blog on YouTube, and he gained about 90,000 subscribers by this time when he announced his presidential campaign. In 3 weeks, he was arrested during a campaign event, even before the official campaigning started. And then his wife announced that she will run for president in order to, first of all, help her husband. And it went on, and it was also happening in context of other things like COVID response. The response of the regime to COVID crisis was very unusual. Belarus was one of only 2 countries in Europe that did not impose any lockdown measures. Lukashenko president did not recognize any COVID threat at all. Essentially, he said that it's not a problem for our people, and it definitely angered many people. In addition, there was an issue with economy. Economy was experiencing some issues, problems over the last couple of years. Poverty was rising. And finally, as I mentioned, this rise of bloggers, those prominent but very ordinary people who are using quite populist statements, rhetoric to communicate, to speak to people's anger, and people connected to those people, and that's what resulted in, I think, in the rise in mobilization before election and immediately after.
Can you give some instances of how ICTs were used, how they might have been surveilled or censored, or which ones were operating, how they might be used to mobilize and recruit protesters, or in what were the platforms that were used, and how, and whether do you think that it is a very optimistic techno-utopian thing to think that revolutions happen because of the use of digital media, or there are more structural conditions that actually do make them happen, and you have like this sort of complementary use of digital media that accelerate them and so on. So is that discussion we always have in digital activism scholarship? So if you can enlighten us on the Belarusian case, please.
Yeah, indeed. I think media, or changes to the media landscape, uh, clearly played important contextual factor, as well as some kind of instrumental factor, because social media provided an important tool for mobilization. So during the presidential campaign, the state, the police used various tools to surveil the activists who were involved, to demobilize people. Propaganda been very active, state media propaganda, to defame activists. And then, of course, censorship happened just immediately after the polling stations closed. The internet shutdown, never seen in Europe before, never ever seen in Europe before this happened, when essentially almost all Belarusian internet was cut off for 61 hours. It wasn't available to anyone who use internet, and only people who had VPN access could access popular services like social media, like Google, like news media. But by the way, this censorship didn't really work well, apparently, because they also cut off state media propaganda channels, and it also was funny a bit. But it's interestingly, I was doing a quick study and looked at how people responded to this censorship, and I saw that by the day 3 of this lockdown, I found that about half of those people who followed most important protest communication on a messenger called Telegram, which became the key tool for organizing the protest. Half of the followers of key protest local Belarusian Telegram groups were online during lockdown, so they had access. Some of them used VPN, some actually, interestingly, perhaps just used Telegram without VPN, and it worked well because Telegram applies certain solutions to improve its service in Belarus, unlike other companies. And it shows, I think, shows that this type of censorship, lockdown, total switch off censorship, might not be that successful and effective. In fact, we also saw huge mobilization during these days, unseen in the country before, as current protests, unseen in country, and actually very rare for Europe. And we didn't see really these things for a long time, and this level of violence maybe since 80s or beginning of 90s we haven't seen, until, of course, war periods. But what happened during this time, how activists used social media really was important in terms of organizing and everyday coordination, of protest, tactical coordination. Also, as I mentioned, use of YouTube helped to mobilize people before election and spread the message, and actually crush the monopoly of the state television on video political content. So before, for 20 years, video political content was monopolized by state media in Belarus. And over the last just couple of years, or even last year, this monopoly really been crushed. So many huge audiences joined YouTube in Belarus to watch political videos, not entertainment, but specifically political videos. And I think obviously, if not Telegram, there could be something else. And it's not really about specific tool. It's rather about how you use them, as I think is usual. And in that case, in that case, I think coordination, mobilization was really aided by use of those tools. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is a fascinating case. I mean, absolutely. I was um, I was wondering to ask you because I think this is something that has been commented a lot in international media as well about the actual crackdown on protesters and the violence used by the state police forces in Belarus, and because there were some comparisons made about tactics by the protesters, like being watered in Hong Kong, like to change their tactics throughout the protest to avoid police, and the broader issue of how some of the technologies might have used to aid protesters in their struggle against the state security services. If you can please comment on this.
Yeah, exactly. I just skipped it, but indeed there's very huge similarity between how people in Hong Kong reacted to police brutality and police crackdown. They would just come to some spot, police would follow them, come to disperse them, and they would disappear and appear in another location. That's what's been happening for 3 days in Minsk, when protesters would build a barricade, police would come destroy it, arrest some people, but others would disperse, use Telegram to exchange messages, where do we meet next in 1 hour, and then in 1 hour people emerge in another location and another barricade emerges, and then police comes, and it repeats over and over again until police is exhausted and the prisons are full. So police violence also stopped, and perhaps it was one of the reasons it stopped, because of use of this tactic, as the government realized they cannot really crack down on the people everywhere, because essentially every single spot in Minsk been involved, even smallest suburbs, most remote, like 1 hour drive from city center, been involved, as well as, of course, many locations across the country, more than 40 locations at least been involved, according to my preliminary research. And obviously, when lockdown happened, people switched to phones. They started calling each other again. They used SMS services. This is another thing to overcome censorship. Then they switched off phone network at some moment. But still, people continued, because it's like kind of they use other technologies to access internet and exchange messages. Yeah, but at the same time, another important thing, what we call affordances of social media, this potential of social media that was helpful, was affordances for anonymity of messengers, and anonymity of even YouTube. You don't really need to reveal your name. You can produce videos without showing your face, modify your voice. That's what's been used by many activists. So we still don't know really who are key coordinating leaders behind the protest. We know one person who is in fact in Poland. His name is Niechta. His nickname is Nechta, but we don't know who are people in his team, for instance, and they're hidden by those affordances for anonymity, and this type of things really help as well.
I wanted to ask now a little bit about the external geopolitical relationships there, because there is this concern that, I mean, to begin with, I think Alexander Lukashenko blame Russia, that they want to interfere, that they blame other foreign agents. So there is sort of some similarity has been attributed to Crimea. And other cases where you have, for example, we know historically South Ossetia or Pridnestrovia, you have like this post-Soviet kind of countries and the interference and whether Putin is going to send in his army and all this to foreign intervention. And these are like more the external kind of structural factors that have some impact, obviously, in what is happening inside Belarus at the moment. And I cared for your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think Russia is interested in keeping Belarus under its control, because Belarus is very much connected to Russia. That's what's been done by Lukashenko. He been subsidized by Russia for many years through cheap oil, and Belarus is oil exporting country, that though it doesn't have its oil resources that allow this type of export. I think Russia is paying a lot of attention to these events, but there is no one single opinion in Russia how to react. In fact, so far reaction, if judging from the media, from state media, was very neutral. In fact, supportive. They've been supportive of the movement, which is in contrast to what happened in Ukraine, for instance. During Ukraine protests that didn't look very similar, but was also about sort of authoritarianism versus democracy. Those events were really kind of criticized by state media in Russia. Now there is some disinformation propaganda on Russian TV about Belarus, which is actually very similar to what they've been saying about Ukraine events. But this time, interestingly, the amount is not as significant, not as big as it used to be with Ukraine or with Georgia when Russia attacked Georgia in 2008. So there are some similarities and differences. I'm not sure what they will do, but definitely Lukashenko requested some help from Putin. We don't know exactly what they agreed to, what kind of help they agreed to. They talked about military treaty that requires a partner of the treaty to send army forces in case of external aggression, but obviously there is no external aggression happening in Belarus, and no one clearly gonna do anything about that. But Lukashenko may try to imitate some aggression, like sometime been done in history, and it would be very sad moment if he wants to use Putin's help of his military, because if they come in the country, they might never go back, and obviously it will be disaster for the movement. But it's really might happen just tomorrow, in coming days and weeks. We don't know, but many things can develop very quickly. There are many options for Russia. They also can send the riot police, because though it seemed like Belarus had many riot police around, it has only 1,500 those policemen. Russia has many more, and may just send to help to impose another wave of violence, for instance. So, but definitely there will be some Russian involvement, and they might be also seeking for another candidate. They might be looking for their man to replace Lukashenko, I think, as well.
Thank you, Alexandra. This is comprehensive. I mean, just to say that we are on the 17th of August, whoever is actually watching this. So there's been reports that Lukashenko said that NATO is at the gates, and Putin offering military assistance, etc. So that's where we're at the moment. I was going to ask you a broader question regarding the future of democracy and the role of everyday digital network media in this democracy, and what you see let's say, two key problems are in relation to democracy and this social media, network media, ICT use. If you can give us that, so we can finish our discussion off.
Well, clearly, based on case of Belarus, current case, I can see one of the key problems is it seems like that it's much easier to connect to wider audiences if you use a populist rhetoric, and if you use populist statements, it's much easier to explain your position, to speak to people's anger about COVID crisis, for instance, about other pressing issues. But it's not necessarily that type of things and that type of statements that can help us to improve democracy and bring to power most capable people. And that's what we see in Belarus, as I mentioned. Though we really don't know who are those people who've been now venerated by the public, those people who've been voted for as an alternative to Lukashenko. We never heard of them, and we don't know their political affiliations, political position. In fact, another issue is, of course, that what we also see, what I was also a bit worried is how of course, media amplify certain things like, I don't know, in the case of Belarus, it was violence. Yes, violence really, on the one hand, united people, it's good. So people don't like violence, and they said, no, we don't want to live in a country that just is based on violence against people. But at the same time, it's a kind of sensational content, and there is not much discussion of the nature of things. At least this type of process, like communication, it focuses on current events. It's good, but it doesn't focus on any new ideas or any solutions to the crisis, in fact, and it doesn't really provide any mechanism for really fast understanding of what would be most appropriate for most of the people solution to the crisis, except for kind of negative agenda, which would be resignation of Lukashenko, maybe destruction of part of the system, or even some kind of putting in prison people who are responsible, those people responsible for repression. It's important, but what would people really want from this crisis as a solution? I'm not sure, based on the media conversations.
Thank you, Alexander, for giving us such I think for me it was comprehensive and understood a lot more than I have read in the media. That is always wonderful to have that exposure to somebody that is from the field, that he understands digital media and the country they're talking about, a more in-depth understanding. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. My pleasure.